for the purposes of making this a full conversation, so my name is Erin Clark, and I am interested in getting community feedback on a concept of intergenerational care in central Vermont. And about a year and a half ago, I started thinking about this idea. I had heard about an intergenerational care center in Milwaukee, Wisconsin, called the St. Anne's Center, and where they provide adult day services and childcare under the same organizational umbrella. And this is a model that's used in other places. It's not widespread, but it's had a lot of success where it has been used. And it has, benefits for both the children in the developmental sense and acceptance and having, building relationships, as well as for the older folks of feeling purposeful and having connections with young people and of breaking people out of their silos. Whereas today, people tend to be kind of designated by age, right? The kids all go to school together, and the older people are, they go to the senior center or to an assisted living, so it's very segregated. So working as a home health nurse in central Vermont, I saw a lot of people in need of adult day services, people who are in their homes who need assistance on a daily basis but aren't interested in being institutionalized, essentially, or having to leave their homes. People want to age in place as long as they can. So to that end, once upon a time before COVID, we had Project Independence, and that was the adult day program in Barrie. And that did close during COVID and did not reopen. And there are other adult day programs in Vermont. There's 11 of them. The closest ones to us are like Bethel, and there's one in Morrisville, and then one at UVM and out from there. There's quite a big program in Middlebury. They have a very nice place. But none of these are intergenerational. They're just adult day. So they, there's a great need in central Vermont for this, based on what I've seen as far as folks living, in a rural environment, having challenges of transportation and mobility and living in homes that might not be well adapted to having mobility issues. The other population that adult day services often serve is people with memory issues. So if one spouse is living at home with another that has Alzheimer's or dementia, giving them some rest and some respite from caring for that person. Any questions at this point? Because so I have some questions that we made up to kind of find out what you guys think about this, or any ideas that you have. Is there anything that you feel like needs further explanation at this point?
I would like to know what the size of these systems is in Vermont, those different ones you mentioned. How many people are living at this?
Not living, but being served.
Being served in this situation. And, compare it to what you saw out in Milwaukee.
Right. So a lot of the ones in Vermont are pretty small. I think the biggest has a capacity of maybe 90, and that's Middlebury. And the smallest, like 15, in Woodstock, they have one there. And the one and those are just for seniors or folks with disabilities. The one in Milwaukee is very large. I don't have a number, but just based on the square footage of their building, and the fact that they serve a city that has a population larger than the state of Vermont. I think they have a couple million, and we have 650,000 or something. But it's, very urban environment. I have some literature here you can look at some point that had some pictures of their building. It's quite nice.
Now, is this building a pre-existing building being used, or is it built?
It was built specifically for this purpose.
And this has been going how long?
They, I believe, 25, 30 years. I think they just celebrated a milestone. And so that program was started by the Sisters of Assisi, I think. The St. Anne Center was a religious order that started it. One particular woman kind of was the driver. And she was an occupational therapist by background, and she started an adult day program and then expanded it to include children. So that was kind of the impetus for this. And there's been a fair bit of movement, in the State House and politically in Vermont around childcare recently. The Let's Grow Kids program has really kind of fired up the childcare conversation. So kind of benefiting from that momentum, I feel like this can pick up on that, and as well as the senior care part of it. All right.
So Erin, can you continue your story in terms of how you got to this point?
Right. So I did a lot of knocking on doors for about a year, and I met someone named Bob Kriego, who works in Brattleboro as a community development consultant, but he also is the executive director for the Garden Path Elder House. So he wears several hats. And I approached him about writing a business plan for this project, and he was agreeable to that. And very soon after that, I was approached by Senator Westman with his desire to see an adult day program established in central Vermont again. And he said, if you've got the energy, I will write it into the appropriation. And so we got a grant funded for working on the project to bring it to fruition. And so work in earnest started the 1st of August, where, I wasn't just kind of doing it on the side. And our kind of rough goal is that by February of this coming year, we'll have a board and we'll have a business plan. And hopefully that business plan is informed by these meetings as far as what people are needing and wanting. And And then we'll move forward kind of to phase 2 in developing, with more fundraising and more program development and that type of thing. So that's how we got to this point. Could I present some of these questions to you and get a little feedback? So as you think about the challenges family members face in caring for an elder or disabled family member in their home, what are the issues that concern you most? Why are you worried about these issues?
I would think that one thing would be, are the family members available when needed? And, how do families have to deal with these problems? What are the, again, it's kind of a question coming back to a question, but what for any given family are some of the major challenges of looking after somebody who needs to be home or cared for, during the day? I mean, it kind of is, I'm sort of tossing the question back without, because I don't know the answers.
What do you think, Paul?
I don't know, I may come back to it.
Okay. So generally, what I come across is that people try to make do with, kind of whatever they've got. And they get to a point where it's not working anymore. And at this point, there doesn't seem to be a lot of options for those folks, especially people who don't qualify for long-term Medicaid. I don't know if you're familiar with. So Medicaid is like, long-term Medicaid is like Medicaid, which is health insurance for low-income folks. And long-term care Medicaid is what kicks in if for low-income seniors who need care. And so it can pay for, a nursing home stay or residence, but it can also pay for adult day programming. What are the supports, what supports are available now to help frail elders and disabled adults living independently? Do you use these services? Which ones would you recommend these services? So, or even if you know someone who, uses a particular service.
Yeah, I mean, I would imagine home health does a lot of that, visiting nurses, not in the sense of the ones who are hired by the hospital to work there, but
Right.
visiting nurses who can come to people's homes. We certainly experienced, a good 15 years ago, having Paul's father living in his own home, but with, very much sort of needing perhaps more support than even we were giving him. And then he ended up going to a local assisted living facility, and, that's where he finished off his life. But, I don't know how whether we did enough at that time to get any available services, but he was getting some.
Right. And were you the ones who kind of, went to, where did you go for the services that he did get?
Well, I think we relied on his physician primarily to recommend, some home health care kind of things. I think he had a heart monitor, and so, that was through the phone.
Right.
But it was more, kind of trying to have a sense from his doctor, what should he have for, monitoring and what have you. And, we were doing his meals and, I don't know, I guess some of his cleaning, some of his laundry. And at that time, I was semi-retired, so not fully retired. And Paul had flexibility in his day.
Well, yeah. I don't know as I'm a frail elder yet, but maybe in some ways, but I'm certainly affected by my lack of vision. And, we have gotten some assistance with that from the Association for the Blind and visually impaired, that type of thing on a limited basis.
And from DAIL, one of their subdivisions, where somebody comes and assists Paul with using magnification and an iPad type thing, training him to better use those to facilitate his visual limitations.
So it sounds like, which I kind of would imagine is the case, but that the doctor's office was really a point of springboarding.
Yes.
And likely for a lot of people.
And recommending, sending a recommendation through to
Right.
a couple of agencies that we've made use of.
But that's certainly not their primary line, so it's sometimes not as directed, if you will, as
Meaning it's not the doctor's primary
yeah.
concern or responsibility.
Yeah, I mean, they don't expect to be advocates necessarily for people with such individual issues. And so sometimes they, and, they think about places that they may send you to and stuff like this might help, but I don't think they have their fingers in that pot very much, which is maybe understandable because they're straight out doing other things, but, you have to work some to get things rearranged to work. So.
If you had a need like this, where if your mobility decreased or you had a need for more services, where would be the first place you would go?
Typically the doctor.
Yeah, doctor, and then probably call council on aging, or call home health and hospice, depending on what the doctor would, suggest. Those are the ones that just come to mind.
Yeah, well,
In terms of what I see in the paper and a lot of those two organizations, I think they probably both do some general public awareness of what is available, and then they send out their fundraising newsletters, which give good examples of people whose needs are being addressed.
Well, and sometimes what happens is that you have friends who've either had issues similar or have friends who have, and they say, you talk to so-and-so, this group or that group provides services. And so sometimes that, in working with your peers, just in conversation, whatever, you learn some things that you didn't realize.
Right.
So that certainly is one thing that happens, but there's nothing specifically directed toward that. You know, it isn't like you're dealing with an organization or, you know, officially, it's just, oh, maybe I should try that.
Right.
And word of mouth.
All right. Now, I know the next question talks about, you know, have you used adult day services in the past? Knowing you guys, I know that you probably haven't accessed those. Paul, your dad, or
He didn't
your
go
parents.
out of the home
Right.
for things. But we have, you know, at least one good friend whose husband needed memory care daytime coverage, and she took advantage of that. I think it was through Project Independence, and she would take him to Barry so she could have some time during the day to do what she needed to do. So,
Right.
but I wouldn't know the details of it and the overall, as you say, the positives and negatives.
What services, I'm going to morph that next question to be a little more suitable. What services would you imagine needing in the future? If you know, choosing to stay in your home as long as possible, and, you know, what, or even when you look at people that you know living in the community that are trying to stay put, what do you see as being kind of the crux services or the needs?
Yeah, I mean, I imagine that one is accessibility to their own home. You know, getting a ramp put in if it just makes it easier, or all those, you know, winter services that an older couple or a single person at home would need, is being able to get in and out of your house safely and, you know, reasonably comfortably, you know, whether, and especially if you're using a walker, you know, and then right on top of that would be transportation if you're not driving yourself, and, you know, and then meeting all your day, you know, your weekly needs for getting groceries, and, you know, again, having some kind of sociability in your day. And then, you know, obviously the in-home things are laundry and cooking and cleaning and physical care and that kind of thing. Yeah, you know, getting to appointments. You know, I think we try to pay attention to what's out there for driving services, and, you know, this new Gopher, we haven't tried that out yet, but we've been alerted to it.
Yeah, that is growing in popularity for sure. And transportation is one of those parts of this program and of adult day programming that is very key for a rural state like Vermont. All of the programs, you know, have a keen focus on transportation, and some of them own even their own fleet, which is really nice. There's some great benefits to that, and others, you know, try to partner with the local transit authority to try to get folks to adult day. But that is identified as one of the major components and challenges to a project like this. What is your experience with childcare, past or present? Has the childcare that's been available met your needs? What do you see as the barriers to obtaining quality early childhood education?
Well, that sends us back a few decades. And certainly with schools now, most public schools offering some degree of preschool, you know, 3, 4, 5-year-olds, early 5-year-olds. that's different than it was when our children were growing up. And we really had to cobble, we had to do quite a bit of cobbling together for, probably less so for all-day care than before school, after school care. And probably you yourself know, very similar story, Erin. So, and I'm sure, I just know the need is great and it's challenging, and there's, centers come and go, and home care situations come and go, and, it's interesting to just see what's out there on Front Porch Forum for people either asking or, offering services. I think, even if the youth population is declining in Vermont, according to what they're saying about school populations, it's still pretty critical. Probably more so for single parents, but not necessarily more so.
You probably actually have, if you had a system that worked reasonably well, that would probably actually increase the number of people who would be using the services, because that's one of the reasons that they always talk about. That people who come here and try it and they can't find the services.
Mm-hmm.
And so you either don't have kids where they have to go someplace else. It's not just the jobs that are available, but some of the services like that kind of go hand in hand with having a workforce that is tying up the parents,
Right.
All the time. And you really need that in order for things to happen. It isn't like the old days.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, the supports of childcare and housing and, all pieces that go along with life. What about intergenerational programming appeals to you as kind of a concept?
Well, I think if you go back historically in Vermont and lots of places, families used to be more closely connected. And perhaps if a woman of middle age wasn't working out of the home, she may have been more available. And I think it's very gender, biased. She may have been more available to look after the grandma, the grandpa, whomever was nearby or right in the same house structure. And then, children would be growing up perhaps with the older generation around. I mean, I think it happened more, I don't know when. Probably started to change way more so after World War II. When the whole structure of American society became, far less rural and much more, American dream oriented.
Right, kind of the
Family.
nuclear family.
Yeah, going and having their own home and their own kids, and grandma and grandpa were elsewhere. And, we certainly, being grandparents, we know, whether our friends have their grandchildren around or don't. But to get to the programming and, certainly if a facility is able to structure things right, or program things right, then there are things that can be done across the generations. It will depend on the physical abilities more so of the older people, but also the physical abilities of the children who are there. But there certainly can be things like singing, storytelling, games, simple hand activities, cooking, holiday celebrating. I will tell you, Erin, that for a while when the Neighbor to Neighbor program existed around here, it was an aspect of AmeriCorps, I want to say, or a federal program, and it may still have some elements going on, as a teacher, I arranged through Neighbor to Neighbor to have my fifth grade students walk to Pioneer Apartments, I guess once a month, to do things there with the residents. And again, fifth graders can do, just about most things. And everybody liked the holiday celebrations. In particular, we would do some fun things at Halloween, and then we'd do some things around the winter holidays. And again at Valentine's Day, maybe for St. Patrick's Day. But they were things that were easy to kind of come up with ideas and to have a little excitement about particular holidays. If we weren't doing holidays, sometimes I would find some kind of program that would span across the generations. And I think the kids, it brings out in children, again, fifth graders rather than preschoolers, it brings out their ability to relate to an older generation or people with needs. And some kids kind of jumped right in, and some kids maybe held back more. Same thing even with the residents, but when I retired, the Pioneer Apartment people, they were bemoaning that we weren't coming anymore. So, and I would see them, walking on the street or, someplace, and, so that was a little older children, but, but very much, there's lots of things that little ones can do with the proper guidance of their own daycare person with older people.
It seems to me that there's a significant psychological issue that comes into play here. Speaking as senior citizen who's been around the block once or twice, you see the need. You watch people, and there's some folks who don't relate very much to being with young kids, and other ones who, it's almost like a magnet. It does a lot of good things for them in their psyche to be engaging with other generations. And, I think that's one of the problems that we have that didn't used to be so much of a problem when, you had 3 generations in a household sometimes, at least during part of an elder's final years, that, there were things that they could do and have social interaction, maybe planned, or maybe just, it just happens because the two are in the same place at the same time. And I think it does good things for both parties. And I think back even into my childhood, we didn't have, most of the time we didn't anyway, have my grandparents in the house, although we did for several years toward my grandfather's and grandmother's years. But growing up, we used to have a lot of community things going on, in the neighborhood. And this was in a rural area where you didn't have, everybody was a farmer except our family, school teachers and stuff instead. But, those are the things that I still relate to today. Is the kinds of things that we did when the older generation or two ahead of us, and we were all in together situations at the community club or whatever it was. Uh, and, you know, I think those are the kinds of interactions that you can't take away. You know, once they've happened, if they're good, you remember that, and that is an important part of your life. And I think one of the things that I see is so many young people today just don't get that. You know, and so
They don't receive it, you mean?
yeah, they don't receive that opportunity, or people don't see that as an opportunity. You know, it was just accepted that everybody would do that kind of thing. I can't remember when I was a kid, for example, and all the neighbors and stuff, we'd ever get together, they'd all be there. You know, it was today, you know, they're off playing a game in town 20 miles away, or, you know, and the seniors in many cases are more or less locked up in, you know, with other seniors.
Right.
And what happens is you end up spending your time talking about all your ills and all the things that are wrong with the world and stuff like that, instead of actually engaging and making things better, and taking advantage of life skills that have taken 60, 70 years to do, and have young people who get excited, want to try things, you know, all those things that we sort of tend to give up on because we figure nobody cares about that anymore. But if it's basic skills and experiences that happen to every human being if they have a chance, then I think you get a double positive out of it. And I think that's very important for both generations.
Yeah, I'm very excited about the concept, obviously, because I've put a lot of time into kind of bringing up this idea and this concept. I was very close with my grandmother, my dad's mother, and they would come up and visit in the summer, and they had a trailer, and between probably the ages of 7 and 11 or 12, and I think that really informed my vision of things, and also kind of I'm drawn to older people.
Yes.
You know, and that informs the work I do now as a home health nurse. That that's really, I know that's my calling.
Well, that happened to me for certain. That I always got along better with people one generation or two generations ahead of me than I did with my peers. You know, even when I was, a kid or a teenager or whatever, I was more interested in what the older folks were doing, or what they knew, which was things that my generation was, I guess, willfully walking away from. You know, they were obviously, like a lot of young folks, they were into themselves, and the world was just their choice to do with, so I got more of a broadening experience by that than a lot of my peers did, and I guess it probably still shows all these decades later.
Yeah. So that's the end of my questions. And like I had mentioned earlier, the feedback that we're collecting from people through these community meetings is to inform the business plan in the beginning stages.
I'm sorry, I have to go. Yes, but I'll send you, I ended up doing that in Word, I'll send it to you.
Wonderful, thank you. So yeah, that's, the plan is to kind of bring all this information together, and thank you.
Yeah, I got some good stuff. I did like a summarizing
Uh-huh.
thing, but I think it will be helpful. So
Yeah.
I'll send it to you
Yeah.
tonight or tomorrow morning.
Excellent, thank you so much. Yeah, so, and I think that things will morph, and I expect them to, based on what we find people's needs are. And I do, sometimes I have to keep myself focused, right? Because the intergenerational thing gets so exciting for me. I think, well, what about slightly older kids? Or, what about, maybe not people who would necessarily come to adult day, but, seniors in general, ones that are more able-bodied. What's the role for them in this picture?
But I think you need to stay.
I know.
Yeah, where the need is greatest.
Yes.
Because I think you'll get more financial support and more, perhaps, community support, so.
Yeah, and in a lot of cases too, the caregivers for those who need more support are, they may not need as much support, but we're still providing support for them in terms of respite and education and,
There's a lot more in the paper about support for caregivers, and I know that there's other avenues or programs that, I just happened to read about in the paper, so.
yeah. Well, they're very important, the caregivers in the community, because because the number of paid caregivers is very small compared to the need.
Right,
Yeah.
right. And the cost of paid care would be,
Yeah.
can be probably challenging for families, so. Anyway.
Well, thank you guys.
Sure. Yeah, and I wouldn't mind, I'll send you an email just about maybe some other ways to promote your meetings, so.
Yes.
And you
and I
probably
think
thought
that-
about them, but.
Yeah, I think the Barry meeting, I've already got a handful of folks who said they would be coming to that one.
Okay, good.
And yes, I'll take any,
Sure, yeah, I'll
any
just.
suggestions.
Yeah.
And are you up for doing additional meetings?
Yeah?
Well, she's scheduled for,
Yeah.
Yeah.
Three of them, I think.
Yes.
Well, what oftentimes happens is that, at the beginning, you don't have the message hasn't gotten to people yet. And so I think you're gonna find that you're gonna get more people once
As
you
you-
start talking about it.
Right.
And people hear about it, and it might pay to for people like us to talk to people that we know who we think might be interested in such things. And and then if we could set up a meeting in a town, knowing that you're gonna have a much greater chance of getting more people,
Right.
because they've been asked if they're interested, and they could look up, Carl's
talk.
visit with you or Kevin or whatever, that then it would take a little while for this to build up, and then
Right.
you may begin to get more intergenerational interest.
Mm-hmm.
And
Okay, so, Diane, wrap it up, she's got, she's checking that.